In this episode of the Encounter Report, 4 bartenders round up some gin in Golden Sun 1. There's Axelrod, your humble narrator, who did a second plus playthrough on an emulator. Alongside him is Crayson, the marathon runner who did a second plus playthrough on an emulator, Mr. JRPG, who did a second plus playthrough on the Wii U, and Ryoshin, the grinding expert, who did a blind playthrough on an emulator. Get that juice ready, because we're mixing some gin. First up are battle types, and I have a few disclaimers. Firstly, optional or side quest locations like Lunpa Fortress have their encounters labeled as optional, except in cases where it's a boss or random encounter. Secondly, there are certain fights like tornado lizards in the Suhala Desert that are required to be done to progress the story, hence them being story encounters. However, if you go through that location multiple times, you'll have to do those same fights even if they don't progress the main story. In this instance, I have also classified the ones required to progress the dungeon as story encounter. Lastly, it appears the first 4 encounters of the game aren't technically random encounters, as each person got the same number of enemies, advantage, and by all accounts, seem to be scripted so that they are required to happen. With that said, I've labeled them random encounters to be safe, but they're likely story encounters. And with all that out of the way, the one thing that can be added here is Golden Sun 1 has way more encounters than I think people remember. That said, they're also pretty quick encounters, which lends itself to a relatively short game. Battle locations are up next, and we can see that dungeon encounters dominate here. In general, world map traversal was pretty quick, and the time between encounters was considerably more forgiving. It's also fairly interesting to see Crayson have more encounters than myself, yet have less time spent in dungeon encounters than any of us. For combat types, we can see the full toll that the encounters took. Ryoshin fought 200 more encounters than myself, yet his total time spent in fight encounters isn't much higher. By comparison, Crayson and Mr. JRPG also have some distance between them in the number of encounters fought, but their times are much closer together by comparison. Lastly, Crayson crushes us all with the amount of encounters ran from. Subtypes are going to fly by here since there's not much to see. 100% of everyone's grinding was for world map gin, and the advantage and back attack encounters have an asterisk, in that these are the ones that I managed to catch. In all likelihood, each participant had more, but they were mashing text so fast that it was tough to catch them all. We got party composition up next, and this is one of the few games where we have the same party for the vast majority of the game. Interestingly enough though, Ryoshin was the only person to get Jenna to level 3, and Ryoshin was the only person to have Ivan die the least amount of times amongst the 4 party members. Pretty sure Ivan is filing for workers' compensation on Crayson's end though, my goodness. We've also got the level progression graph for each person. On the left we have the levels, and on the bottom, many of the bosses in the game. Each boss takes up a rectangle in the graph, and within those rectangles, we have Isaac's level for each participant. And here we can see that the progression in the game is pretty much identical up until the side quest portion opens up after defeating the Kraken. As mentioned earlier, Ryoshin is the only person playing the game blind, and because of his desire to collect all the gin and complete the side quest objectives, he quickly took the lead. I'll also clarify that Crayson did not fight Deadbeard, which is why we don't see a level for him. Next up is a new stat, which is the number of enemies per encounter. For Golden Sun 1, all bosses are single enemy fights except the Menardi and Saturos encounter in the Venus Lighthouse, as I counted the Bandit fight in Vault as a story encounter. But here, we can see the game is fairly consistent in its encounter distribution amongst everyone when looking at encounter percent. Also, fun fact, Mr. JRPG didn't get a single 5 enemy encounter until the final dungeon of the game. And to close us out, here are the final combined stats. Overall, I feel there's a pretty wide spectrum here in encounters considering our VOD times. When thinking about how much of a completionist everyone was, it definitely makes sense for Ryoshin, who was playing blind, to have the highest time and thus the highest encounters. That said, when comparing myself, Crayson, and Mr. JRPG, we tread into playstyle intricacies, making the larger difference rather than encounters. And that's all we got for the Golden Sun 1 Encounter Report. I hope you visit everyone's channels and social media to praise them for all this wonderful data. With another report done, we can hold elections on which elemental clan we all belong to. Except if you're Jupiter, you lose. Thanks for watching, appreciate it, see you on the next video.